Howdy, my name is Jason Corbett, and I am a gameplay programmer and level designer for PHL Collective, a developer of Ben 10 Power Trip, Goozy, and Justice League Cosmic Chaos, which came out earlier this year. Welcome to Blockout, quick tips for whiteboxing in Unity. There's many terms for the process of prototyping level designs in game development: block mesh, gray boxing, whiteboxing. These terms all generally refer to the concept of building out spaces and objects out of simple primitive shapes. For this talk, I will use the term block mesh and white box interchangeably, since your shapes can be gray, they can be white, they could be any color. I forgot to set my timer. The primary benefits of block mesh are the ability to create and test levels before significant resources are spent on creating and placing final art assets. The goal of block mesh is to work quickly and iteratively. The ability to test frequently and immediately make changes lets you find out what's working and not working in your designs before you get too attached or waste, other devs' time on ideas that aren't actually fun or make sense, or any other countless issues that, come up in the design process. Before we get into like some examples and tips, for more, examples of this process, you can check out the Blocktober hashtag and profile on Twitter and other social media networks. Blocktober takes place year-round, but this, as the name implies, it is most active every October, where developers from companies of all sizes, share their own examples of their block mesh, often with side-by-side examples to their in-game counterparts. As you can see from some of these demos that I've pulled up, they start with very, rough images, rough ideas, and then come back later with the art. But before they get to the art part, they have to figure out, is this gonna work? Am I done on time? All right, on to the Unity stuff. With that said, so what I like to do for whiteboxing is to set up a series of tools and materials that will let me quickly just make stuff, Many of these particular tips I'm talking about right here are kind of Unity specific. Unreal has its own powerful tools for block out and block mesh, where primitive shapes can be added and subtracted, but for Unity, a little easier to work with primitives. So I like to have a library of materials that like I can just throw, random colors on things just to get different stuff going. Just a palette. Simple colors and textures, you don't have to get overly concerned with fidelity, stuff like that. Checkerboard and grid stuff kind of works really well. Triplanar shaders, which is a concept of stuff that is in world space as opposed to on the texture to the object, is a little also really good for whiteboxing. You can check out Minion's art for some tips for triplanar and other shader stuff. But one thing that, so using the shapes that Unity has, like there's all these primitives like cubes, and they are, they have a center pivot, and it's kind of hard to like precisely, scale it and keep it in place. So something I like to do is create my own prefabs that have a pivot in a consistent spot. In this case, you can take advantage of Unity's ability to parent objects and make prefabs out of that to reassign where the pivot is. Another more advanced way to do this is to go into Blender, take primitives there, move the pivot point, but that's maybe out of scope here. So I'm just going to create an empty that, come on, I can't see because of this thing. Put this here. No, let's start over. So I have this cube here. I'm just gonna put it here. Make it empty, which will be here, but I actually want to unparent it, move it, use vertex snap, which I'm holding V to snap the vertex to different spots. I'm running close on time. Barely started. I'm gonna rename this white box cube cube to this parent. And now the pivot is over here and I can scale it like however I want. And it's very much more precise. But again, you can do this in Blender and stuff like that by making a model. Another thing I did was the cylinder. I have parented it to the center, so it's way easier to scale it uniformly, stuff like that. Tip number 2, real quick, and we'll kind of run through this real fast. Another thing that's really useful to do go away, zoom bar. How do I hide the floating media controls? Okay. I want to Control Alt Shift H. All right. It's really helpful to also be able to create measurements for like how your character controller moves and stuff like that. Not that one, this one. Like, what is my max jump distance? So sometimes I like to make prefabs that are scale references where I can say my jump distance is actually 3. So like that. And I can make this a prefab. Way over time. We're rushing. I can make that a prefab and then use this in the world to be like, oh, well, that's not going to fit. So I can go like over here and line that up. I can do the same for jump height. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And then because my pivot's like kind of nice and clean there, I can just bring it down to match, stuff like that. Another useful thing is to figure out the height of doors in relation to your player, stuff like that. You know, this is all really handy stuff to Whitebox. Some more stuff here, but I think that's kind of the gist of what I want to go over for just really basic Whiteboxing, getting started. Further stuff kind of quickly cover. Don't be afraid to plan stuff out on paper even before this. Like prototyping is a great way to sketch out ideas, but actually sketching on paper is another great step before you actually get to the engine. And you can take these concepts of parenting stuff and build more complex, you know, white box models that give an idea to people before you even get artists in there and stuff like that. Kind of short. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So I agree. Getting those metrics first. Yeah, no, that's all really cool stuff. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'd like to open up the questions. I actually have a quick one. So I am more used to doing any kind of gray boxing in Unreal. Not that I'm a big 3D person. I'm mostly design 2D games. But that being said, when I have the little bit I have done in Unity, I usually use ProShapes. I think I'm saying that asset name
ProBuilder.
Right? ProBuilder. Thank you.
Yes.
ProBuilder. I had the name earlier and then I got wrong. Yeah, I usually use ProBuilder because that's the most Unreal like, and I believe it's also owned by Unity now as like an official Unity package. So how do you think ProBuilder compares to just using the primitives the way that you are in base Unity?
I like ProBuilder in concept, and I used it a lot on Atoms. It has some quirks. It's not actually like so like the Unreal stuff is like you're adding and subtracting shapes. ProBuilder, you're actually just kind of like they have their own set of primitives, and you're some really handy tools like you can make stairs, and like when you create it, you're like, all right, I want 10 steps and it be this high. That's really handy. But the way that it stores that data is kind of weird. But it's like in the scene, and like it's hard. It makes it a little tricky with prefab. So like you look at your prefab and there's nothing there because all that data is sort of stored in the scene. So it's just sort of a weird technical issue with how Unity works, because ProBuilder is making mesh that model data and storing it, you know, in a weird spot. So I've kind of moved away from using Pro Builder, as of late for that reason, just because it kind of messes up when I'm making these like, more complex compound, white box things before we hand that off to our art department and say like, here, this is the scale that we want this thing to be. This is, stuff like that. So Pro Builder is a great tool. And I'm not trying to discourage anyone from using it. And there's a lot of capability from using that, but it has
Yeah.
some quirks
Yeah.
that I've moved away from.
Yeah, it sounds all very, very quirks very focused on Unity, which is typical for a lot of the packages in Unity. Rob asks, would these be good skills for a level designer to showcase in their portfolio or at least mention in a resume?
I think it's definitely something when you're showing just any kind of like when you're building a level, for a portfolio. Like if you're purely a level designer, you may not, be working with art assets. I mean, a lot of these days, there's a lot of like art assets available online where you can just sort of like import them and drop them in. And there's also lots of that's sort of like maybe more of a set dressing thing. So I think it's good to show that you can make a interactive space. I'm not sure if it's like something you can really mention in a resume that's like I work in a white box, but I think it's definitely a skill to develop, and it kind of will show in your work when you say like, and here is a level I made, and here's the concept, and here's, you're gonna white box it to show it, to show your idea.
For sure. Very cool. Also, Rob wants to know how many tips you did not show from the original plan.
I think I mentioned them all in some way. I'm not sure if I think I don't think I did. I didn't mention hold control to snap the grid, but I did it. Again, all of this stuff is like muscle memory. So I was like, wait, I have to slow down.
For sure.